So tonight we're going to hit two classes, Class 4 and Class 5, which of course is, we'll try and get two classes in one night. I think we can do it. Prophets 2. They're both the same theme, so I think we can do two classes in one night. We'll just have to expedite nicely. And of course, it's the message to, or the message of the prophets to, let's just say, the northern kingdom, and southern kingdom. So tonight we're looking at the message of the prophets. And who are the prophets that we're looking at in this section? Jeremiah, Habakkuk. And the northern kingdom would be Amos and Hosea. All right? Why is that important? Why is it important to distinguish between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom?
Because the northern kingdom was not going to be redeemed.
Yes. That's true. There was no redemption for the northern kingdom. That kingdom was apostate and it would be destroyed completely. Unredeemable, the northern kingdom of Israel was. Speaking of the kingdom and not the people. Right? So we have to learn to distinguish between that. God's preparing to judge all the nations. Not the people, but the nations. The entities of the nation. So it's important for us to make that distinction on many levels. So God is going to, from the standpoint of the prophets, Amos and Hosea, He's going to destroy that kingdom. And the people, well, He will preserve the people. So the word there is Jezreel. Jezreel. And it's referring to the Jezreel Valley, also known as the Valley of Megiddo, which is where we get the word Har-Megiddo from, or Armageddon. Har-Megiddo is the mountain of Megiddo. Armageddon is Greek for Har-Megiddo. So Jezreel, and Jezreel means the Lord's planting, for whatever that means, but the Lord's planting, Jezreel. So how many of you have been to the Jezreel Valley? You've seen it? You've drove past it, or you've been in it? It's a plain, right? It's a valley, it's a plain. It's not a very large plain, but this is where the Battle of Armageddon is going to occur. And then we have another word here for tonight, which is a very important word. It's not really a word, it's a phrase. I wonder if I gave myself enough room. I think I did. What word is that? That's a pretty common word in the Bible. Not Adonai. Yehovah. Right? And that's the word that we have for Lord in our English Bible. Lord. Which we have to be careful about that, because the word Lord in Hebrew is Adonai. And it's not Yehovah. But because the Jewish people have a sensitivity about saying Adonai and saying Yehovah, they've created this situation where they don't say Yehovah, they say Adonai in place of Yehovah. And Adonai really translates to Lord, Master, Adonai, Lord or Master. You know, in Psalms 110, maybe someone can read Psalm 1, the first couple of verses in Psalm 110 for us. What does it say? One and two, maybe?
The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies.
The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make my enemies a footstool for you. So you got two words there in the actual Hebrew Bible, which one is Yehovah. The first word for Lord is Yehovah. So it's not Lord, that's his name, Yehovah. Well, one understanding of his name. And then the Lord said to my Lord, the second word for Lord there is Adonai in the Hebrew. So Adonai is master, so Yehovah, who is the sovereign God of Israel, is a good way to interpret the word Yehovah. The sovereign God of Israel is my Lord. Sovereign God of Israel spoke to Adonai, who is David's Lord. So Jesus questioned the Pharisees and he says, if the Son of Man is the son of David, how did David refer to him as Lord? Which was a puzzling question, sort of a quizzing question. So Adonai and Yehovah, I think we need to see that, because many times if you listen to Jewish music or you speak to a Jewish person, Hebrew music, you would encounter the word Adonai in place of Yehovah. For instance, when we worship over in the congregation, I think most of us here are congregants. When we worship over in the congregation, in the first part of the worship procession, you will have songs, Hebrew songs, and you'll see the word Adonai in it because we're referring to David's Lord, who is Yeshua. David in that psalm was referring to his Lord. The Lord said to my Lord, so Yeshua is his Lord, and so we'll see Adonai because we're praising Yeshua. And then as the procession of worship songs go forward, we will get to references of Yehovah and not Adonai, because we're praising Yehovah, the Holy One of Israel, at that time. So, for instance, the last 3 or 4 songs that we will do, you will see the word Yehovah in the lyrics of the songs, and that's because we're praising Yehovah. So it's to us, it's relevant, it's important. I'm not sure if you've ever picked that up as you've worshipped or read the songs off the wall. So Yehovah Adonai. So that's why a lot of times, for instance, I would say Yehovah because I'm referring to the Holy One of Israel. So this is Yehovah, and that's how I pronounce it. Now many people today, they get all caught up in the sacred name movement, and they get themselves all spiritually tangled up, really badly tangled up, to the point where in this sacred name movement they will plumb designate you to hell if you say the wrong thing relative to the name of God. It's a crazy movement. It's just nuts. At any rate, so, but for us, Yehovah is, some people look at this and they say Yahweh. Okay, if that's what you get from it, but that's not what it actually transliterates into. So anyway, so tonight we're gonna take a shot at getting 2 classes in one. I think we can do it. We're going to do class 4 and class 5. Class 4 is, what is class 4? God's message to the northern kingdom. So what is the plight of the northern kingdom again? They were apostate. How did they become apostate? What was the journey that they ended up on to become apostate? Rehoboam, the split between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon. Jeroboam was a general. He was a good general. He served under King Solomon. Solomon became threatened by him because one of the prophets spoke to Jeroboam and said that you will receive a kingdom and that God will take the kingdom away from Solomon. So Solomon exiled him immediately because he was a threat. And so what happened? Well, God spoke to Jeroboam, confirmed the word to him, and Jeroboam became a king in the northern kingdom. But he didn't rely on God to hold his kingdom or to expand his kingdom. He relied on his own political maneuvering. And he ended up becoming incredibly, sinful. A man of fear, not a man of faith. And he created an apostasy in the northern kingdom. He introduced a new form of a new religion, actually, a complete new religion with different sacrifices, different from the sacrifices that were occurring in Jerusalem. He introduced a new priesthood, different gods plural. He said that he introduced the calf, the ancient calf of Egypt, and he said to the northern kingdom that this is your God, golden calves. And he said a golden calf in Bethel and a golden calf in Dan. And what that did was it sort of captured or encapsulated the northern kingdom of Israel and kept them bondage to worshiping the golden calf. Now, that apostasy ultimately would offend God to the point where God determined that he will completely destroy, without mercy, the northern kingdom. It would not survive his wrath. Now, we talked about this before, and we'll see this tonight again, that quite often in Christianity, whenever a Christian preacher or a theologian or scholar would like to build a case against Israel in regards to replacement theology, they would go to the prophet, mostly the prophet Hosea and Amos as well. These two prophets are the favorites of the replacement theologists. And why? Because they were not speaking to the totality of Israel. They were speaking to the apostasy of the northern kingdom, where God said very clearly that he would destroy Israel, referring there to the northern kingdom. And that's why it's important for us to distinguish when he's referring to that apostasy and when he's referring to all of Israel. A proper study of the Bible will bring you to a real strong conclusion to support that reality. Now, why has church fathers and scholars since the beginning of Christianity, why have they completely missed this? Well, it's just poor scholarship compounded with a willingness to not see the reality of Israel's permanent position with God. And so that's how we ended up with replacement theology. But a lot of what's written in Amos and Hosea is used as fodder to fan the flames of, to create the flames of replacement theology, and it really shouldn't. So let's begin to look at these prophets and what they said concerning the northern kingdom. The prophet Amos indicted the northern kingdom in that they were fleshly. They were lustful and they were fleshly. And so we're going to do quite a bit of reading tonight. Someone read in Amos chapter 2, 6 to 8, if you would, please. Amos chapter 2, 6 to 8. So they were sort of given over to the lust of the flesh. What we're going to see as we study concerning the northern kingdom, especially the indictments, we can recognize a lot of these transgressions in modern Christianity, in Western Christianity, in Christianity in general, but we're just focused on Christianity here in the West right now. And so the idea is that the apostasy that existed in the northern kingdom also exists in modern Christianity. Right? So what did Jeroboam do? He created a new and different religion from what God had already established. He created a different priesthood from what God had put in place. And so Christianity has done more or less the very same thing. which is the nature of an apostasy, right? So we're going to see the similarities between the northern kingdom of Israel and what we see in today's Christian landscape. So someone read there for us Amos chapter 2, 6 to 8.
This is what the Lord says. For 3 sins of Israel, even for 4, I will not repent. They sell the innocent for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample on the heads of the poor as on the dust of the ground and deny justice to the oppressed. Father and son eat the same girl and so profane my holy name. They lie down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. In the house of their God they drink wine taken as spice.
So they're very fleshly, they're carnal. There are things happening there that should never happen among God's people. So God here, we're going to see also that God, another indictment is that he said that he hated their festivals. So someone else now read Amos chapter 5 verse 21. He hated their festivals. Amos chapter 5 verse 21.
I reject your festivals, nor do I delight in your solemn assemblies.
So God says it pretty clear right there. I hate your festivals. I don't delight in your solemn assemblies. Now, the historians will all agree that Jeroboam, in order to create the distinction between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, he created new and different festivals, new and different feast times from what had been appointed for Jerusalem, what had been appointed in Leviticus chapter 23. So he introduced new feasts. And so it's for good reason that God comes along and says that I hate your feasts and your solemn assemblies, because they were not his. He didn't appoint them. Right? Now, did not Christianity do the very same thing? Yes. Christianity came along 500 years later, roughly, and did exactly the same thing, created new festivals, different festivals. So if God would say to the northern kingdom, his own people, that I hate your festivals because you've created a different set of festivals, he likely will say the same thing to us. What do you think? So God says through the prophet Amos that I hate your festivals. Now, so often, preachers who are determined to damn Israel, they would use that reference to say God hates their festivals, and so we shouldn't celebrate their festivals. No, we should not celebrate Jewish festivals because the Bible speaks of God's festivals. All right, so God's festivals is what they were not celebrating, and God was angry because of that. They were doing something completely different. And that, that's a simple reality. It doesn't take a lot of deduction to come to that conclusion, but many people struggle with that. And as simple as it is, they struggle with that in Christianity. Very unfortunate. But God's festivals are God's festivals. Yeshua celebrated God's festivals. Paul, to the end of his life, celebrated God's festivals. When Paul was arrested in Jerusalem, he was there to celebrate Shavuot. And he said to people who didn't want him to go to Jerusalem to celebrate Shavuot, that nothing's going to stop me. I am going to go to Jerusalem and celebrate Shavuot. So even Paul, who usually is attributed to inventing a new religion, said quite clearly, I am going to celebrate the festivals. It states in the book of Acts that he celebrated Pesach I think it was he celebrated Pesach in Corinth. And that after Pesach, he was going to make his way down to Jerusalem, or up to Jerusalem, to celebrate Shavuot. So you see, even Paul, book of Acts, first century church, celebrated biblical festivals. Right? We today, we don't. Christianity today, we don't, because we've embraced pagan festivals. Just as Jeroboam, in his apostasy, introduced pagan festivals to separate the northern kingdom from Israel, the church did exactly the same thing to separate the church from Israel. And the church has succeeded. So God said, I hated your festivals. Another indictment is that the northern kingdom, they were a fattened people. They were wealthy. They lived sumptuously. and against God's will. Amos chapter 6, 4 to 6. So if there ever was a basis to teach concerning tithing, I think this would be the basis right here, which I don't do. I don't teach on tithing, but if I ever did, hopefully I would remember to pull this reference or this concept. The northern kingdom was extremely wealthy, exceedingly wealthy. Why? Because they actually monopolized the olive oil trade of the time. Olive oil, the pressing of olive oil, was actually invented and developed in Samaria. They did it. They began that process. And for a while, they controlled the production of olive oil. And that made them very wealthy. They also made wine. And being positioned right there on that commercial land bridge, their business was good. They did well. You know, selling wine and olive oil between the two continents. They did well, and they were very rich. But they gave nothing to the temple in Jerusalem, right? So the Israelites were supposed to tithe to the work of the temple, but they gave nothing. All of their monies were kept for themselves and for the building up of their idols, the building up of their idolatrous temples. And they were not tithing to God in the way that they should have. God brought incredible judgment and indictment and judgment against them because of that. So someone read in Amos chapter 6, 4 to 6. And the point is, we must tithe where it's relevant. And the northern kingdom certainly did not do it. So Amos chapter 6, 4 to 6. Someone read that for us.
Those who recline on beds of ivory and sprawl on their couches and eat lambs from the flock and calves from the midst of the stall, who improvise to the sound of the harp and like David have composed psalms for themselves, who drink wine from sacrificial bowls while they anoint themselves with the finest of oils, yet they have not grieved over the ruin of Joseph.
Right. So they were not faithful with their monies. They were very wealthy, and they did not. And in this case, they did not tithe. They did not contribute to the work of the priesthood and the work of the temple in Jerusalem. Why? Because they were completely separate from what was happening in Jerusalem. Why? Because Jeroboam gave them 2 golden calves. Yes, Faith.
What do they mean by they have not grieved over the ruin of Joseph?
It's referring to Joseph. There is another. It's a synonym for Ephraim, or the northern kingdom, or Israel. Don't want to be confusing. So sometimes the word Joseph is used to refer to the northern kingdom, because Ephraim and Manasseh, sons of Joseph, were the leading tribes of the northern kingdom. And so that's what it's referring to. The ruin of Joseph is the ruin of the tribes of the north, Ephraim and Manasseh. So that's what it's referring to. All right, any questions there? All right. So also they were not faithful. There was no faithfulness in the northern kingdom. Faithful to God, of course. Hosea now. Let's read Hosea chapter 4, verse 1. Here's a stinging indictment against the northern kingdom. Hosea chapter 4, verse 1. You guys are going to have to be quick with you.
Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel. The Lord has brought charges against you, saying, there is no faithfulness, no kindness, no knowledge of God in your land.
Yeah. That's not a good thing to hear from the prophet. No faithfulness, no knowledge of God. Why? Because they were given over to idolatry. Drunkenness and idolatry, another indictment that Hosea brings. Same chapter, let's read someone else. 11 to 13. Hosea chapter 4, 11 to 13.
Wine and new wine enslave the heart. My people ask counsel from their wooden idols, and their staff informs them. For the spirit of harlotry has caused them to stray, and they have played the harlot against their God. They offer sacrifices on the mountaintops and burn incense on the hills, under oaks, poplars and terebinth, because their shade is good. Therefore your daughters commit harlotry, and your brides commit adultery.
So if you recall back when we studied in history and in Torah, we talked about what God warned Israel about, their tendency towards idolatry. And that tendency towards idolatry existed because they didn't rid the land of the pagans, of the Canaanites. And the influence of the Canaanites affected the sons of Israel, and ultimately Israel would engage in idolatry in the northern kingdom. And the very things that God warned them about are exactly the indictment that Hosea is bringing against them in that case, in every case. But they would get involved in idolatry, they would give themselves over to harlotry, serving other gods. I sometimes think about the condition, I grieve over the condition of Christianity, especially Western Christianity. I see Western Christianity so much like the Northern Kingdom. Drunkenness, not literal drunkenness, but drunkenness of wrong doctrine, erroneous doctrine. The church is rich, it's fattened, and it's doing its own thing, it's creating its own gods, it's creating its own Jesuses, and very much in apostasy. Also, the Northern Kingdom trusted in the nations, they couldn't trust in God. Their alliances with the surrounding nations were so important to them. And hence they ended up being dependent on these relationships with these nations, constantly trying to ally themselves with Syria, who was a governing force at that time, not completely, but Syria had a good relationship with the northern people, the Assyrians, and they were always trying to politic, not trusting God, very much like Israel today. And so let's read that in Hosea chapter 7, 8 to 11. Would not trust in God and would trust in allegiances with the nations. 7, 8 to 11. Hosea. Anyone?
Israel mingled with countless foreigners, making themselves as worthless as a half-baked cake. Worshipping foreign gods has sapped their strength, but they don't even know it. Their hair is gray, but they don't realize they're old and weak. Their arrogance testifies against them, yet they don't return to the Lord their God or even try to find him. The people of Israel have become like silly, witless doves, first calling to Egypt, then flying to Assyria for help.
Wherever it was convenient, they would run to for help. And that's never a good posture for God's people, because our alliance has to be God only. We ally only with God. We rely only on God and not the nations. That's not a good look for us, for God's people. It's not a good look for Israel, of course. So, God's going to discipline Israel because of the indictments that we just read. He's going to bring judgment upon Israel. So, let's read now in Hosea chapter 5. You guys, how many of you can read tonight? I can read all of this if you want, but I would like your involvement if necessary, if possible. So God says quite bluntly that the northern kingdom will fall. That whole apostasy encompassing 10 tribes will fall. Again, he's bringing down the governance, right? He's not destroying the people, the actual people of the northern kingdom. He's destroying the entity, the convention of the northern kingdom. So in Amos chapter 5, 1 and 2, someone. I said Hosea, Amos. Amos chapter 5, 1 and 2. Amos chapter 5, 1 and 2. All right, hear this word which I take up for you as a dig. The house of Israel, she has fallen, she will not rise again. The virgin Israel, she lies neglected on her land, there is none to raise her up. So Hosea was speaking here prophetically about what will ultimately happen to the northern kingdom. In other words, this is how he's seeing the northern kingdom. Fallen, destroyed, and neglected. God will actually fulfill this. So let's read now also that Amos, same prophet Amos, chapter 7, verse 17, he stated clearly that Israel would be taken into captivity, would be taken out into the diaspora. So Amos chapter 7, verse 17.
Says the Lord, your wife will become a harlot in the city. Your sons and your daughters will fall by the sword. Your land will be parceled up by a measuring line, and you yourself will die upon unclean soil. Moreover, Israel will certainly go forth from this land into exile.
Right, and so let's talk a little bit about the prophet Amos. The prophet Amos was from the area of Tekoa in Judea, right about where our friends Ari and Jeremy are building their farm. Their farm, Gan Aragut is the name of the farm, and that's right about where Amos came from. So Amos was not from the northern kingdom. He was of the southern kingdom, and more than likely he prophesied against Israel, the northern kingdom, from that very spot. Or he may have even go up to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem he would prophesy against the northern kingdom. So I'm pretty sure he didn't go up to Samaria and stand in the gates of Samaria and prophesy this way against Samaria. All right, and I think the scholars agree with me that he stood in his own place, or perhaps in Jerusalem, and prophesied against it. More than likely he would have sent a scroll to the king of Samaria, and which would have been probably ignored. With prophecy like that, why would they take him seriously? So Amos is very blunt, extremely blunt. Now Hosea, on the other hand, he's of the tribe of Ephraim. So he is in the northern kingdom as he prophesied. What we're going to recognize as we read Hosea's prophecies is that he's much more gentle. He's much more appealing than Amos. Amos is very blunt, to the point. I guess because he's in Judea and he's able to do that. Now, nevertheless, Hosea is going to speak indictments and speak about judgment of the northern kingdom. More than likely, we don't know this for sure, but more than likely Hosea was killed by one of the kings of the northern kingdom. We don't know that, but the prophets typically would be rejected, horribly rejected, to the point of being killed. We know that Jesus said that quite clearly, that the leaders of Israel, they would kill the prophets. That was their practice. If a prophet didn't prophesy what was wanted, he would be removed. He would be eliminated. And so think about this. The condition of the country, the condition of Western Christianity. If a prophet were to stand up and prophesy favorably about this country, you know, how God has it completely in his hands, and it's going to be fine, you're going to survive this, and he's going to be largely accepted. On the other hand, if a prophet gets up and says the word of God, which is God's going to draw you into the battle of Armageddon, and as Christians you ought to come out of this system, come out of Babylon. That prophet, the second prophet, would be rejected, completely rejected, because people want to hear what's good for them, what's good for their own national identity, right? And it's the same thing that's happening here between Amos and the other prophets. Amos is dealing with a situation that's in his land, and the other prophets were prophesying favorably about the northern kingdom. God's going to sustain you, he's going to keep your nation, he's going to hold your kingdom together, the other prophets would say. But Hosea comes along and says, no, it's not God's plan at all. He's going to destroy you. So they didn't like the prophets at all, you would think. So Amos also spoke about the destruction of the entire kingdom, the northern kingdom. Amos chapter 9, Amos chapter 9, verse 8.
Lord, am watching the sinful nation of Israel. I will destroy it from the face of the earth, but I will never completely destroy the family of Israel, says the Lord.
Very nice. So God says, I'm going to destroy that kingdom, right? That that nation, that entity. I'm going to wreck it completely. It doesn't have a chance. But the people, no. And I think for us as Americans, we ought to adapt that mentality. God's going to bring this mess to an end. But the people, well, that's different. There's only one place in the kingdom of God for a nation, and that place is in the land of Israel. All the nations will bask in the light of that one nation, yes, but the nations will be completely dissolved. Completely dissolved, and there will be one nation. So, let's now look at the words of Hosea concerning the discipline that God's bringing upon Israel. Hosea says quite bluntly, God's going to drive you out into the nations. Hosea chapter 9, verse 3. Now, where did this come from? The idea of being driven out into the nations. Of course, we saw this over and over and over. Leviticus chapter 26, Deuteronomy chapter 4, Deuteronomy chapter 28. God says quite clearly that when you engage in idolatry, when you do these things, I'm going to drive you out. Hosea chapter 9, verse 3.
But Ephraim will return to Egypt and to Assyria. They will be
All right. Now, so we see here an indictment against the northern kingdom. We see that God says that he's going to bring judgment upon the northern kingdom. Now he's also going to speak, the prophets will also speak concerning the restoration of Israel. That even though God will bring an indictment, he will judge them, drive them out, he's going to also restore them. So, let's read concerning the restoration of Israel. Amos chapter 9, verse 9.
For surely I will command and will sit the house of Israel among all the nations. As grain is sifted in a sieve, yet not the smallest grain shall fall to the ground.
Right. So Friday night I made mention, as I was talking about the Torah portion, that God will not lose any of Israel or the Jewish people. He will not lose them. Now, many Jewish people will perish in what's coming upon the earth, and a lot of them will perish because of their own acquiescence. They will surrender to this government that we're seeing. In fact, they will work in conjunction with this horrible government that we're seeing coming up in the world, and they will enter into destruction completely. Many Jewish people, on the other hand, will not acquiesce to it, and they will be redeemed. They will all return to the land of Israel, and they would all become again the people of Israel. So we talked about that a little bit on Friday night. And this verse here from Hosea is a strong support for that. God is going to shake the nations, and he's going to remove Israel. He's going to take Israel away from the nations and take them to the land of Israel. All right. So right here in Florida, you have a very intense population center for Jewish people. Right here in Florida, South Florida. I think South Florida is the third most populous area for Jews in this country. I think it goes like New York area, Los Angeles, and then perhaps Miami. And so you have three strongholds of the Jewish people in this country, amounting to about 5 million people. Maybe a little less, 4 million people perhaps. So God is saying that he's going to extract all of them. Some of them will be lost, but he's going to extract all of Israel, all of the Jewish nation, and cause them to return to the land of Israel. Also in regards to restoration, verse 14.
Also, I will restore the captivity of my people Israel, and they will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. And they will also plant vineyards and drink their wine and make gardens and eat their fruit.
So whereas Hosea said that your sin is associated with your prosperity, the way you sit under your terebinth trees and you drink wine, and God is saying now in the restoration process, he's going to bring them back in that place of righteousness, and in that place of righteousness, they will enjoy their wine and enjoy their prosperity, but in the place of righteousness. See, God is not necessarily against prosperity. He is against prosperity when it comes from a place of unrighteousness. All right? When we prosper in God, it's because we're standing in a place of righteousness and obedience to Him. So also, Hosea now, Hosea chapter 1, verse 10. Who wants to read that for us in regards to restoration? Hosea has quite a bit to say concerning restoration. He has more to say concerning restoration than Amos, possibly because of where he is located. So Hosea chapter 1, verse 10. Who would like to read that?
The Israelites were like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, "You are not my people," they will be called children of the living God.
Right. So that's a wonderful promise. Also Hosea chapter 3, verse 5. Afterward the sons of Israel will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and they will come trembling to the Lord and to his goodness in the last days. So clearly Hosea is convinced that the people of Israel will be fully restored to the land of Israel. Now what about the relationship of the people of Israel to the God of Israel? Well, that's also going to be restored, because we do know that at Mount Sinai, God wanted Israel to be his bride. That's the relationship that he had slated for Israel, to be his bride, to be as his betrothed. And he wanted the nations to see that quite clearly. And Israel didn't come to that place. Of course, they rebelled against God at Sinai and many other places along the way, played the harlot. Right? And so now the relationship now that God wanted with Israel, even that's going to be restored. So let's read here. I'm going to read for you Hosea chapter 2, 14 to 20. Concerning that relationship that God desires with the people of Israel. Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak kindly to her. He's referring to the dispersion. Then I will give her her vineyards from there. In other words, he will prepare the land of Israel from that place of dispersion, and the valley of Achor as a door of hope. And she will sing there as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up from the land of Egypt. It will come about in that day, declares the Lord, that you will call me Ishi. Ishi is husband. And will no longer call me Bali, which is Lord or Master. For I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, so that they will be mentioned by their names no more. In that day I will also make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field and with the birds of the sky and the creeping things of the ground. I will abolish the bow and the sword and war from their land, and I will make them lie down safely. So God said that when Israel would betray him and act out with idolatry against him, he will bring war upon Israel. That was the first punishment that he will bring upon Israel. Enemy occupation, war. Here God is promising that in this place of restoration, there will be no war. God will not afflict Israel with war any longer. They would live in true peace. I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justness, in loving kindness and in compassion. And I will betroth you to me in faithfulness. Then you will know the Lord. So the word there, Yodea, and this is so wonderful. The word there, Yodea, is to know. Now, we see this also in the book of Jeremiah. We'll see that later on tonight. In Jeremiah, the word there is that you will all know him. And the word there is Yodea. The word Yodea in Hebrew for know is a very special word. It's the same word that's used for a husband knowing his wife. Right? And so that adds a little strength to the Hebrew word Yodea. So God is saying, then you will Yodea me. You will know me intimately. You will know me. When does that happen? When he restores them and brings them back to the land and pours out his faithfulness on them. They become his wife, his betrothed, and they will all know him. In a few moments, we're going to read Jeremiah's account of the same promise, and it's wonderful. All right, they will seek David their king. I think we read that already. Yes, we did. So what about this wonderful promise of a restored restoration? A restored relationship. Right? So the relationship that Israel has with God today isn't quite at that place yet, right? We're not seeing this intense husband-wife relationship between God and Israel. It means that they're not quite there yet. There's still distrust. They're still trying to form allegiances with the nations and depend upon foreign governments and so on. They're looking to their own strength. You know, they're looking to become a wealthy nation by their own efforts and so on. And clearly, they're not trusting God. Now, the time will come when they will put away all of those hopes, false hopes, and they will trust God entirely. And that's when God will act most favorably on behalf of Israel. And that time, of course, has to do with the valley of Megiddo. Right? Because when the nations finally says enough and we're going to assemble against Israel, that's exactly when they will come to the end of all of this. And they will learn that they cannot trust in the nations, that the nations are not trustworthy. And then they will trust God and they'll cry out to God. When they do cry out to God, what will God do? He will hear them. And what else will he do? He will send the Messiah. So, Jeremiah. Let's go to Jeremiah while we're in the vicinity. In regards to this subject, Jeremiah has powerful stuff to say about this stuff. He's got powerful things to say about this. Jeremiah chapter 31. We've read this perhaps half a dozen times. We'll read it again. As it relates to what we see here with what we just read with Hosea concerning the restoration of God's relationship with Israel, the very relationship that he wanted at Mount Sinai. In Jeremiah chapter 31, 31 to 34, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, both northern kingdom and southern kingdom, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their hearts I will write it. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. How you like those words for affirmation? I shall be their God, and they shall be my people. They will not teach again each man his neighbor, and each man his brother, saying, Know Yodea the Lord, for they will all Yodea me, know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. This is the ultimate restoration of Israel, when God will take Israel to be his betrothed. And that's the hope of redemption. Like I keep saying, all of redemption will benefit fully, completely, when this happens. This is it. It's complete. It's done. So, what about the fulfillment of these prophecies concerning these prophets? Who are the prophets to the northern kingdom? Amos and Hosea. And what we've seen so far is that God has a charge against them. He pronounced judgment against them. He's going to execute that judgment, but not without the hope of restoration. Today we're seeing some of that restoration. In fact, it's been happening in earnest for 500 years. Since, like I've always been saying, like I always say, since the Ottoman Empire, the advent of the Ottoman Empire, when they took Jerusalem and the land of Israel as their own possession, not their own possession, but their territory. From that moment on, the land of Israel began to experience an influx of Jewish people from the diaspora. From Spain and Portugal initially, then from Turkey and different parts of the diaspora. So this process of the ingathering is about 500 years old. In fact, 1517, so 503 years old. 1517, 1515, 1517. So this is how long this has been going on. Now in the last 120 years, the whole process has been expedited expeditiously. Is that a word? Expeditiously? Exponentially. I got two words tied up. Sounds good, but it's terrible. So in the last 120 years, we see just an increase in this process, a build-up in this process of the ingathering. In the last 20 years, we've seen even more of it. And what's precipitating what's happening now in Israel? The unrest and the chaos that we're seeing in the nations. And in fact, I would tell you with assurance, and this is quite obviously prophecy, that in the next couple of years, should Trump lose or win the elections in November, in the next couple of years, we're going to see many more sons of Israel making aliyah to the land of Israel. Things will become difficult regardless of who wins the election. And you will have an exodus crossing the Atlantic from South Miami, South Florida, into the land of Israel. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So we're in that time, right? The time we can see the makings of the restoration. But all that these prophets spoke about concerning the destruction of Jerusalem occurred. In 722 BC, the Assyrians captured Samaria, Sennacherib. Sargon II was the first Assyrian king who laid siege to Samaria. And 3 years later, Sennacherib destroyed the walls of Samaria and took captive the leadership in Samaria. What does that tell us about Samaria? Samaria was a well-fortified city. When we go to Kedumim from time to time, we have opportunities to go and visit Samaria from afar, not go down into the ruins of Samaria. I think one of the groups managed to go down into the ruins of Samaria, but I have never been down there. But the ruins are quite formidable. About 5 acres of a ruin. That's large for the ancient world. So Samaria was a well-fortified city, and it took 3 years for the mighty Assyrians to actually destroy its walls and take it captive. 3 years, and that says a lot. The Assyrians, they were a powerful army. They had war machines, they had cavalries, they had everything that a well-supplied army had, and took 3 years to destroy Samaria. Ultimately, they would, and of course, they took initially 20,000 Israelites of the northern kingdom into the diaspora, and then another roughly 91,000 from Reuben, the tribe of Reuben and Gad, into diaspora. So the idea that the Assyrians took the 10 tribes and just bulldozed them into the diaspora is just completely wrong. Completely wrong. That did not happen. A small percentage of the northern kingdom, after it was destroyed, was taken out into the diaspora, which gives credence to what I've been saying. God wanted to destroy the entity of the northern kingdom and not the people. He wasn't interested in just destroying the people. He wanted to destroy that government, which is what he did. All right, so let's talk now about the southern kingdom. Any questions about the northern kingdom? Northern kingdom of Israel? Okay. There's a whole alternate history that exists concerning the 10 tribes in the north. And that alternate history says that the Assyrians took all of the northern kingdom out and pushed them into their regions. And beyond that alternate history, there is now a alternate history that the people in the two-house movement, the two-stick people, conclude now that ultimately the 10 tribes all ended up in Europe, Northern Europe to be specific, and became known as the British people, the Scottish people, and the Irish people. And now God is restoring those people back to Israel, and now so you get that two-stick thing. It's just a crazy doctrine, because it's quite evident that according to actual history, that the Assyrians did not just extricate all of the northern kingdom and send them off to northern Europe, Think about the logistics. And why would the Assyrians do a thing like that? The Assyrians at that time had nothing to do with Europe. They didn't go further than Greece in conquest. In fact, the Assyrians never conquered Greece. The Aegean people never conquered them. They were too powerful. The Assyrians only focused on Egypt, and that's it. Syria and the people of Israel were just periphery conquests. The idea that they sent them to Europe and that Europe was part of the Assyrian kingdom is just bizarre. Where do these people come up with these things from? So why is that relevant? It is relevant because many people in the Hebraic root movement are two-house or two-stick. Redeemed Israel, they refer to themselves sometimes. And the whole basis for their belief system is just wrong. I don't know about you, but I cannot be in a movement when its whole foundation is incorrect. There's no basis for what they believe, and why would I ever want to be engaged in that? The woman who started that movement, her name is Batia Wooten. Batia Siegel is a singer. I don't want to put her name in there. But Batia Wooten, she's very Hebrew sounding name, but she's not Hebrew. She actually comes from Melbourne, Florida. And there was a time when First Assembly of Melbourne, Florida was very pro-Israel, very Hebraic, very, very Hebraic. And that movement in Melbourne sort of spanned out. It just went out. And many of the churches in Melbourne became pro-Israel, very Jewish-centered. And this particular woman, Batia Wooten, came up here to meet with Ken and John, and I think it happened right in that little cry room back there. She had a little conference with Ken and John about what she believed, that people are identifying with Israel because they're actually genetically of the 12 tribes. And that's why that's why there's a consciousness of Jewishness and focus on Israel, because there was a DNA connection. And Ken and John completely rejected her and what she was saying. But didn't stop her. She went out and she did her thing and formed a whole movement that's based on that speculation. And it's pure speculation. So, the northern kingdom. All right, let's begin now to look at the southern kingdom, which of course is referred to as Judah, and even referred to sometimes as Benjamin. Why would the southern kingdom be referred to as Benjamin? Because Benjamin and Judah were together. Right? So Benjamin and Judah are also referred to as the southern kingdom. All right, so the indictment against Judah, against the southern kingdom, is that they forsook God. Now, by and large, the southern kingdom was more upright, more God-focused, more correct in their position with God, but yet they continued to falter periodically. They would get for themselves an evil king, like Manasseh or one of those other kings that will introduce pagan worship, idol worship, and the southern kingdom would spiral as a result. Remember when we did the kings, we saw that the kings of the north were consistently and perpetually evil, and that the kings of the south, the kings of Judah, were occasionally very, very upright and righteous. And so by and large, for that reason, Judah was more or less upright, but would go through these periodic declines. And so God said that they had forsaken him. Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 23. Who wants to read that? Jeremiah 7, verse 23.
Commanded them, saying, obey my voice, and I will be your God. Then you will be my people, and you will walk in all the ways which I command you, that it may be well.
Okay. Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 13. Let's read that. The Lord said, because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, nor walked according to it. Let's read 14. But have walked after the stubbornness of their heart, and after their Baals, as their fathers taught them. Let's keep reading. Therefore thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will feed them, this people, with wormwood, and give them poisoned water to drink. I will scatter them among the nations, whom neither they nor their fathers have known. I will send them the sword after them until I have annihilated them. So what a proclamation of judgment, right, coming upon the people of Israel. Also, God would stretch out his hand against Judah. Zephaniah, who wants to read for us now? Zephaniah chapter 1, 4 to 6. Prophet Zephaniah, chapter 1, 4 to 6.
Stretch out thy hand against Judah and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I will cut off the remnant of Baal from this place, and the names of the idolatrous priests, along with the priests, and those who bow down on the housetops to the host of heaven, and those who bow down and swear to the Lord, and yet swear by Milcom, and those who have turned back from following the Lord, and those who have not sought the Lord or inquired of him.
So even in Judah, they were doing the same things that the northern kingdom was guilty of, worshiping the Baal and all of the different gods, the host of heaven. So in the prophets now, it talks about the groves that were in Jerusalem. What are the groves? The groves are, well, one of the places where they would worship Baal and Ashtoreth as well, but mostly Baal and Milcom, which is another word for Molech. So they would worship the Molech and the Baal in the groves. So, reminiscent of the Bohemian groves, right? And even Judah was engaged in this horrible activity of worshiping the Baal and the Ashtoreth and the Molech. So Jeremiah proclaimed destruction upon Jerusalem. Chapter 15, verse 3, I will appoint over them 4 kinds of doom, declares the Lord: the sword to slay, the dogs to drag off, the birds of the sky, and the beasts of the earth to devour and destroy. I will make them an object of horror among all the kingdoms of the earth because of Manasseh. Who was Manasseh? Manasseh? He was that evil king that introduced the worship of Molech, the son of Hezekiah, the king of Judah, for what he did in Jerusalem. So archaeologists discovered a Molech in the Kidron Valley, right where it states that Manasseh built a Molech right there in the Kidron Valley. So if you go to Jerusalem, and sometimes when I take people, I take them up the Mount Zion, and then I can from that place point to where the Molech is, and you can see the archaeological dig right there in the Kidron Valley where they found the actual Molech, the altar of the Molech that Manasseh built. So God is bringing this incredible judgment upon Judah because of that offense that he built a Molech right there in Jerusalem, the holy city. So also, God spoke to Jeremiah about his ultimate dispersion, expulsion of Judah. Someone read chapter 16 for us, verse 16 to 18. If you would, please.
And they shall worship, and after will I send from the others, and they shall have it, as when I send from right hand and out of the wolves and rocks. For my eyes are upon all your ways, they are not hid from my face, neither is there iniquity hid from my eyes.
So the hunters and the fishers, right? Again, like I've said before, in the 1980s, there was a line of prophecy that was being circulated around churches stating that the hunters were going to come after the fishers, and that first God's going to send the benevolent fishers that will go out and fish the people of Israel out. And that was used quite a bit for fundraising, to bolster ministries that will focus on bringing Jews from Russia and from different parts of the world to the land of Israel. So the idea of the fishers, right? That was really, really pronounced in the 1980s. Well, the prophet here anyway is referring to two groups of God's enemies that will seek out God's people for destruction. Both fishers and hunters, because the goal is the same. A fisherman will catch fish to eat fish. A hunter will hunt deer to eat deer. Same effect. So the fishers and the hunters are the same people. They're doing the same thing. At least in the context, very clearly in the context, it's stating that very reality, that the fishers and the hunters are pursuant of the same goal, which is to bring destruction upon Israel. I've never caught a fish and ate it that survived. Never once. And so, you know, it's just bad doctrine. Doctrine that was used to garner funds and to get people excited about Israel, and we shouldn't have to manipulate the Word of God to excite people about Israel. Right? We shouldn't. Chapter 16 of Jeremiah, 16 to 18. 16 to 18. You know, how do people present or advance doctrinal positions that are so wrong and no one checks them on it? Why does that happen? They're not reading it in context. They're not taking it word for word and precept upon precept. They're just cherry picking verses, and it still happens today. I mean, I'm talking about the 1980s as if it was that long ago, right? I became a believer in the 1980s, and so we should never cherry pick verses from the Bible to establish a doctrinal basis on. You have to take the Bible in its full context. That's how, folks, that's how we've gotten into trouble so many times and so profoundly in the Christian world. We cherry pick, we take verses that we want out of the Bible, we build entire monuments of doctrine on it, and it's entirely wrong. Entirely wrong. So the question there is, does God care about the fidelity of His Word? Does He care about how we treat His Word? Yes. Does He really care about if we interpret the Bible in proper context? Yes. Or could we do whatever we want? You know, the apostasy of the northern kingdom is very much like the apostasy of Christianity. Because the northern kingdom did whatever they want. If it seemed good, just do it. If it fits my agenda, we'll just do it. We'll rig it up, make it work. And that's what Christianity did. The Council of Laodicea in 369 AD, that's when they decided, hey, we don't need the Shabbat. We don't need these festivals. We'll just provide our own festivals. And the pronouncement was that we have the authority to do it. Yes, the presiding bishop over that council in Laodicea said that. We have the authority we have the authority over the Word of God, we can change it. No surprise that happened at Laodicea, right? What was the predicament of the church at Laodicea? They were lukewarm. Jesus said to them that you think you're well off, you think you're wealthy, but you're pathetic, you're wretched, poor. Because of what they were engaged in, and ultimately they never repented, right? So when John would have sent that letter out to the church at Laodicea, the Word of God, the scroll from Yeshua, they read it, they said, hey, whoa, let's repent for about 2 generations. They never fully repented. All right. So now let's talk about the restoration from the standpoint of the prophet Jeremiah and Zephaniah, the restoration of Israel, of Judah. Now, at this point, the restoration is all-encompassing. It's Judah and Israel, right? We saw that in Jeremiah chapter 31. When I restore the house of Israel and the house of Judah, so it's the restoration of all of Israel that's going to be referenced here with these prophets. So Jeremiah is not focused on the restoration of the northern kingdom. He's focused on the restoration of all of Israel. So God would regather Israel. He'll bring them back. Jeremiah chapter 31. Someone read Jeremiah chapter 31 verse 10. We were there a moment ago. Let's head back to Jeremiah.
O nations, and declare it in the isles far off, and say, He who scattered Israel will gather him, and keep him as a shepherd does his flock.
That's a one verse post. A one verse post. I post on Facebook verses from the Bible, and I look for the verses that are most applicable to be posted and that will communicate one thought. And so that's a one post verse. A one verse post, excuse me. And so that particular verse is so powerful because it captures in just a few words the reality of God's commitment to restore Israel. He who scattered Israel will regather Israel and restore them. And that's powerful on many levels. He's saying no one is really able to restore Israel but me. I'm the one who scattered Israel. I am the one who will bring her back and restore her. So the prophet Jeremiah put a lot of emphasis on God's faithfulness to his people Israel. So chapter 31, keep your hand there, verse 35 and 37. Who would like to read that for us?
Thus says the Lord, who gives the sun for light by day, and the fixed order and the stars for light by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. If this fixed order departs from before me, declares the Lord, then the offspring of Israel also will cease from being a nation.
Wonderful promise, isn't it? Also in Jeremiah chapter 33 as well. Who would like to read for us? What do I want to read? 33, 19 to 26? Someone? Yes, that's correct, 19 to 26. That's a lot. Let me read it. The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah saying, Thus says the Lord, if you can break my covenant for day and my covenant for night, so that the night will not be the day and night will not be at their appointed time, then my covenant may also be broken with David my servant, so that he will not have a son to reign on his throne, and with the Levitical priests my ministers. As the host of heaven cannot be counted, and the sand of the sea cannot be measured, so I will multiply the descendants of David my servant, and the Levites who minister to me. Now, those verses are not referring to actual King David. It's referring to house of David. It's referring to Yeshua, the descendants of David. We studied this back when we did Torah and history, right? So the descendants of David in this context is referring to the church. The church is the house of David. And the Levitical order that God is preparing to minister to him is in fact and will be the church. This is not something you want to just speak to your Jewish friends about. You don't want to. You definitely do not want to go to your Jewish friends and say, we Christians, we are the priests, we are the Kohanim. That will not go over well. But it is very clear in the Bible that we are. And it's something that we ought to be humbled about, that God will appoint us to be his priests. Now, God has the nation of Israel as a nation of priests unto the nations. So Israel is a nation of priests. Yes?
I thought it was by the order of Melchizedek.
Yeah, absolutely. The Levites, the word Levitical here is referring to the actual Kohanim at this time. So Jeremiah existed when the Levites were Kohanim. They were priests. And they were all sons of Zadok. They were sons of Zadok who were sons of Pinchas. So there's a symbolic reference here that goes back to Phinehas and to Zadok, where God promised an eternal priesthood to them. So we know that the Levites, the sons of Zadok, are no longer priests. They haven't been priests for 2,000 years, and it's pretty clear that they will not be. In fact, in Ezekiel chapter 43, I think it is, God said quite clearly that I have rejected the sons of Aaron to be priests. And then in the New Testament now, we have this reality that the church is being prepared to be a priesthood. All right? Jesus referred to us as a priesthood 3 times in the book of Revelation. Peter referred to us as a priesthood, and this is the priesthood according to the order of the righteous king. Who is the righteous king? Well, David, King David, but the son of David. So the references that we just read here in Jeremiah chapter 33 is referring to the son of David, who is King Jesus, and a priesthood that will accompany him, which is the Levitical, the reference there, but the priesthood that will accompany him is the order of Melchizedek, the priesthood of Melchizedek. The word Melchizedek there means a righteous king. So there's a priesthood associated. I think we studied this quite a bit. Zechariah chapter 6 spoke about that priesthood, that reality that King Jesus, the branch, the Zemach, would be king and priest, which is the order of Melchizedek. So we are that priesthood. So God will be faithful to the house of David, which is the church. Again, is there a reference in the New Testament about the house of David being the church? There's a very clear and concise reference in the New Testament to the house of David being the church. We've talked about it many times. All right, so Acts chapter 15, right? The Jerusalem Council. James settled the argument concerning, Gentile believers coming into the church. He was dealing with that whole issue. And then he made that statement. He says, this is the house of David. The church is the fallen tabernacle of David that God is raising up in these days. Clearly identifying the booth of David, the fallen tabernacle, the house of David, as being the church. All right? Now, in regards to now Israel, same chapter 33 of Jeremiah, we're going to read 23 to 26. The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah saying, have you not observed what this people have spoken, saying, the two families, which two families? The two families which the Lord chose, he has rejected them, ? Thus they despise my people, no longer are they a nation in their sight. So the two families there, we would say, would be, well, the house of David and the house of Israel. That's the two families that he's referring to. Thus says the Lord, if my covenant for day and my covenant for night stand not, and the fixed patterns of the heavens and the earth the fixed patterns of heaven and the earth have not established. I have not established. Let me read the whole verse again. Let me do it justice. I don't want to botch it up too awfully. Thus says the Lord, if my covenant for day and my covenant for night stand not, and the fixed pattern of the heaven and the earth have I not created, I have not established. I'm not going to do it any justice. Then I would reject the descendants of Jacob and David my servant, not having from his descendants rulers over the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I will restore their fortunes and will have mercy upon them. So the reference there to David, his servant, of course it's referring to Messiah, and then Jacob there being Israel, and the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The two families, the two houses that God has established in the earth. So the reference there is that God is going to be faithful to Israel and the house of David. Now, why is there a reference to the regathering or the restoration of Israel that points to also the restoration of the house of David? If in fact the house of David is the church, why is there a restoration that occurs at the same time? Book of Acts, chapter 15 again, James clearly recognized that the house of David is the church. The prophet here is referring to the restoration of the house of David and the house of Israel and God's faithfulness to both. And why is it being referenced in the same verses? Because God's going to make that restoration happen right about at the same time. The two sticks, the two witnesses. And the restoration of the church is happening at the same time with the restoration of Israel. Okay, so I'll just end this now by saying that at the Reformation, which occurred in 1517, actually, 1517, I think it was August of 1517 that Luther nailed his essay on the door of that cathedral in Habsburg, I think it was. And that initiated the Reformation. A couple months later, I think in October, the Solomon of the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan was the Sultan Suleiman of the Ottoman Empire, just 2 months later took Jerusalem. And at that time, he decreed that Jews can then return to the land of Israel. So, you have the restoration of Israel being initiated almost exactly at the same time, being initiated, with the restoration of the church being initiated just 2 or 3 months earlier. Initiated. Because that's when the restoration of Christianity really began. It began when Luther nailed that essay on the door of that cathedral. That's when it began. Because that began the process by which the Bible would be liberated, and that people like us can begin to actually acquire a Bible and read it and believe it. So you see right there you have a dovetail, a connection between the two movements, the house of David and the house of Israel. So ultimately, God's going to restore both. So in order to restore the house of David, it has to be taken away from the house of the apostasy of Christianity. Right? Is there a Christian house of apostasy? How many Christians are there in the world? 2.5 billion? It's quite a house. And from that house, God's going to remove the house, he's going to restore to himself the house of David, the believers in him, those who will actually be the house of David. And they will be restored at the same time with Israel. Yes?
Do you think that this thing with the return that happened over the weekend is any kind of like restoration? I don't know if you've heard about it.
The return?
Yeah, Jonathan Kahn, who's in Washington, D.C., and he organized all this stuff.
Yeah.
That's part of
Let me say, and I'm going to offend about 5 people, I have no respect for Jonathan Kahn. I have no respect for him. He's made prophecy that purported to be a prophet. He's made prophecy that were not fulfilled. And yet people continue to follow him. So I don't know him, but based on that, I don't follow him. I don't consider him to be a prophet. He's sensational. He's famous, but he may not be a prophet. So the return. So it's something happened this weekend with the return. What was it?
I guess any year, I don't know if it was him or other people organized something that was like nationwide.
All right. Okay. Well, I've read some of his writings enough to know that he is descended from the Manifest Destiny people. Manifest Destiny is an idea that came about in the early 1900s, that the United States of America is the new Israel, and that Washington is Jerusalem and California is the entrance into the temple. That's Manifest Destiny. You can look that up. Manifest Destiny is that old, and when it first was introduced in the early 1900s, it became sort of a trend of doctrine that started to sweep through the churches at that time, the Pentecostal churches. By and large, it was rejected because there was no basis for it. But Jonathan Kahn, like what's that other guy's name? Real flashy guy as well. What's his name? He speaks real quick. Perry Stone. Jonathan Kahn, like Perry Stone, and many of them, they manifest destiny. At the basis of what they teach, they manifest destiny, and it's replacement theology. They might stand up and say, I'm a Jew, look at me, I'm wearing a tallit, I pray for Israel, but they're really praying for the conversion of Israel. So, for the conversion of Israel, that Israel would become all Christians. So if all Christianity, if all of Israel, if all the Jewish people become Christians, there would be no Israel. So I don't follow those people because I know where they're coming from, and they're not coming from a good place. So the return, I'm sure they had a good time. I'm sure they said some really good things. But how entirely biblical is it? You can invent whatever you want with that. So, but I'm sure they did good things. I'm sure they had a wonderful time. All right, let's take a break and we'll come back at 20 after 9.